All right. Hello, I am Miss Underwood. I am a case manager over at Ford Cottage. I have been a case manager since March. I worked over in day treatment and now over at Ford. It's my second time doing this training, so hopefully it's better than the first. Progress, not perfection, right? Um, as res counselors, y'all will be doing logs for IST, which is individual skills training, and GST, which is group skills training. I believe everyone except for Mr. S, is that right? Has been able to sit in on one or the other, IST, probably GST if y'all have been in the cottages for a little bit. So that's going to be in the mornings and in the afternoons. We have GST sessions. They're an hour long. All the kids are together. And then y'all coming in now, there will be like preset prompts. There's groups that we do the same time every week. Sometimes we switch it around, but we try to, or our emphasis is on keeping the groups evidence-based and proven to be effective with this population. So we typically have pretty like standard days and times that we do like the same groups. So your BRS log is going to be your proof of service. So we cannot ask for any money if we do not show that we're doing any work, right? So this is going to be the way that we show that we're providing the services that we're getting paid for. Like this says, think of it as a receipt, and they are legal documents. So there might come times that I've never experienced it, but there might be times where your log is going to get subpoenaed in court because maybe, I don't know, maybe a kid claims that they didn't receive any services while they were here, and we did nothing but finger paint and play outside or whatever. And so these logs are going to be the things to keep us from getting in kind of that deep water. So the process of writing a log, we'll go through it kind of chunk by chunk in the next several slides. I will just tell y'all right now, the best way to learn how to write a log is to sit down and write a log. So I can kind of tell y'all the background. I can let y'all know what we're doing this for, but really the practice is going to come when you're down in the cottage, when you're sitting in those IST and GST sessions and writing the logs afterwards. The other residential counselors will be your most valuable resource as far as being able to learn how to write good logs. But for now, I'll just give you all the lowdown on why we're doing it, because that seems to help with motivation when you're here and writing logs. So starts with the demographic information and then description of services, clients' participation services, identifying the collaborative problem solving thinking skills. So that'll be something that we put together, kind of our clients' lagging skills, the things that they need to work on. And then, like I said, we like to keep our groups and our ISTs evidence-based. And so going into each group, we will kind of have a focus on, okay, we're going to work on this skill. We're going to work on behavior management or social skills or mood management, whatever it is that that prompt kind of covers. So then we will do, okay, and very importantly, we'll talk about when not to write a log. So there will be times when certain behaviors from a client will make it to where it's not appropriate for us to log that time, right? If a kid is upset and leaves group and goes down to his room and sits in his room the whole time, we can't log that he's refusing because he can't even hear the group. He can't understand what's going on. That's not services provided to the child, but we'll get into that. So right off the bat, you're going to have the demographic information. This will be put in the computer, I believe, for you in our log program. You'll just click the kid's name and then you'll put in the date that you're entering the logs. Each kid has a goal sheet. Like I said, that's on our side of it. We create these goals for the kids, and then their goals will be put into the system. I think that's going to be a update that comes along here in the next couple of weeks. And then you're going to enter the number of units. So a unit is a 15-minute increment. So if I do group from 8 to 9, that's how many units? 4. Good job. And so you have a little bit of leeway. If I start group at 8:03, right? That doesn't mean that I lose that first unit. That's still 4 units. Go ahead. It's going to depend on like how much time you have with the kid, right? The residential counselor job is a hefty job. Like you'll have a lot of stuff going on kind of all the time. We don't expect y'all, yeah, we do not expect y'all to sit down with the kid for a whole hour and be able to talk about, their all of their lagging skills and everything that they need, right? So groups should be 4 units barring anything unforeseen. Sometimes we'll have kids, especially Ford Cottage, some of those younger guys, they love to take their time. So in the morning, they'll be brushing their teeth, goofing off in the hallway, who knows what. And so maybe we'll start at 8:15. And unfortunately, like that's just a unit loss that will be made up through IST later, or the weekend units tend to kind of round out the total number of units that they need, because we do continue to do groups over it. Kind of the layout of what used to be our handwritten logs, it looks like. So you would check off, actually, let me just go full screen. Sorry, I didn't realize. So that's going to show a service goal. Like I said, you'll pick which goal. This is all computerized. So that top part is going to be on the computer. You're just going to click a button. The progress rating, we'll get into that in a little bit, but you're going to choose a progress rating, put in the time provided, the number of units that the time provided equals. And then the description of service, like I said, we have a lot of like pre-written prompts. I think Steel Cottage especially is like on top of it with the prompts. They have them go through case managers and everything. So typically it'll be a matter of copy and pasting a prompt. If for some reason we're doing a new group, or there's a prompt that needs to be reworked in some type of way, there's likely been conversations between like the management team to fix that. So I would say it will almost never be on y'all to just make up a completely new prompt. Like usually there's some type of format for that. But if that is the case, then like I said, all the residential counselors have like varying levels of experience. So if you are not sure what to do about the prompts, like please consult, please ask questions. You shouldn't feel like you're alone to do anything that you don't feel confident or comfortable doing. So description of service, and then document the client's participation. And we'll get into what that looks like exactly, but that's going to be kind of looking at their behaviors during group, what kind of participation did they have, if you can get any quotes are fantastic. And we want to make sure that their participation in the group is directly applicable to the service provided. So if you're saying, oh, we're doing a group where we're talking about social skills and we're learning the skill of introducing ourselves based on coaching from staff, showing the kids how to introduce themselves by performing skits in which they introduce whatever. Then in the client service record, you don't want to say, oh, they sat quietly and they filled out a worksheet and they, things that are not congruent. So you want to make sure you're saying, oh, they participated in whatever skit, or they asked a question following whatever skill was being told. So just make sure that they're applicable to each other. And then always sign your logs, please. I hate sending logs back because they're unsigned, because that's just like unnecessary work for y'all. Okay, so description of services, like I said, it must teach a skill. You can't just say, oh, we sat and talked about our favorite TV shows for an hour, right? That's not appropriate residential care. Group title must match the description. So that last one didn't have a title, but typically we take our prompts from various workbooks. So there will be titles like social skills, chapter 1, introducing yourself. Yeah. And so just make sure those match. They don't have to be word for word, but again, it should describe what the chapter, whatever it is that we took the prompt from. Okay, words like coached or taught are traps. So they're not words that we can't use. Like we can absolutely say coach, we can absolutely say taught. What I will send your log back for is if you say, we coach the kids on introducing themselves. Exactly. You can say, we coach the kids on introducing themselves by modeling what it looks like to introduce yourself, or, practicing, whatever. But it's not sufficient to just say we coached, we taught. What does that mean? What does that look like, right? And then write down the steps in narrative form. So like I said, it all needs to be reflected back from the service provided. If for some reason you put, we're working on introducing ourselves, we're working on social skills and introducing ourselves. And in the group, 15 minutes in, a kid raises their hand and goes, hey, I have a really hard time looking people in the eye. How do I do that? And your whole group kind of shifts to a different social skill or a different like realm that they need to work on. So maybe it turns to like behavioral management. Like, hey, every time I introduce myself, I get really anxious and then I get really angry. So like, how do I manage that emotion? And so if your group ends up changing from what your intended prompt is, make sure that there is some kind of qualifying information in that. So halfway through group discussion group discussion was focused on this or this or this. But that's going to be the best way to kind of manage, like, okay, these two are not congruent, because our groups don't always work out the way that they should, right? If the kids ask questions, the kids go off on tangents. Sometimes we kind of see a deficit in the middle of group where we're like, oh, we need to talk more about A before we can talk about B, right? So if there's something that comes up during group skills training, it's absolutely appropriate and really beneficial to follow up with them in IST. So if you have a kid who, you're doing your group about behavioral management on anxiety, and they just can't stop talking about how they're so anxious because of the way that they look and the way that their hair is cut or whatever, then it's absolutely appropriate to follow up and be like, hey, I noticed that you were really ruminating on like yourself and your self-esteem. Like, let's talk about self-concept. Let's talk about your self-esteem and how you feel. And IST is really great for kind of game planning for the kid moving forward anyway. So if something like that comes up, that's a perfect time to go, hey, maybe we should get you some clothes that fit better, or let's talk about getting you a different haircut, or planning with them things that they don't always have time to sit down and ask for, or things that are difficult to advocate for themselves. Of course, is that you're able to do at least the majority of your units each week with your spesh. There are times, for example, in the mornings, especially when they're over at school, where a kid will get removed, a kid will ask for a break or something, and you and one other staff are the only ones in there, and this kid's neither of your specials, but you sit down and you talk about, hey, what's going on in school? Let's make a plan so that you can be successful for the rest of the day, whatever. That's a unit, that's 2 units, whatever. So you absolutely can log that, and it's not stepping on anybody's toes, it's not upsetting the order of anything. But if they're all sitting in the milieu and you're like, okay, it's time for me to get IST, we want for you to kind of gravitate towards your spesh before you pick out another kid to sit down and talk with. So again, like, encouraged or identified is not going to be sufficient. Like, just be specific. When in doubt, be specific. You don't have to be super wordy in your log. Sometimes I'll get logs that are 4 or 5 sentences, just the kid was sitting appropriately, here's how they participated verbally, here's how it contributes to their lagging skills, whatever. So you don't have to be like, they sat quietly with their hands to their sides and feet on the floor, whatever. You don't have to be super like descriptive, but regarding what they're learning and specifically what they're working on, that needs to be like pretty clear. Restating, so this is like a big thing that will get your logs returned. If you have the description of service and it says the group worked on mindful breathing for 5 minutes, it's not acceptable to go into the client part of it and say this client worked on mindful breathing for 5 minutes, right? You can say during the mindfulness breathing exercise, this client followed all prompts correctly, or was actively engaged as evidenced by their body language and adherence to the prompts. Like, but you just make sure that we don't fluff up the client participation part with the service provided description. And then give the facilitator credit for what they do. This will be very clear when y'all start leading groups yourselves too. You can say the facilitator guided the group through a mindfulness breathing exercise for 5 minutes by modeling, rainbow breathing or whatever. It doesn't always have to be the client did this, the client did that, the client did this. You can talk about what the facilitator did and how the client responded to it. That's a big one. If you're doing IST especially, you can say staff explained to client that it's not acceptable to high-five their peers at a no-touch facility or whatever. Like you can be very descriptive as well about what you say in those conversations. And you don't have to do direct quotes. You wouldn't say staff said, quote, you would just say staff discussed this, that, or the other. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right, okay. So this is kind of like a couple examples of our format. The facilitator led a group on, and then like I said, that group skill will likely come from whatever workbook or worksheet or is listed in there's like a top portion. We don't for some reason have a example of that right now, but go ahead. So have we done like the yeah, it'll be like from self-esteem workbook for adolescents, okay, and then it's whatever, like negative self-talk or something. Yeah, so then you would say the facilitator led a group on negative self-talk and how to combat it, or etc. So the facilitator described or taught each skill, including, and you would list it. Again, these should all be things that you can find. So you can look at the workbook, you can look at previous prompts. It's not going to be like you're coming up off the top of your head, oh, let's list 3 things. Like, yeah, it'll be very clear whenever you start working on it. Reference a curriculum. The facilitator provided an example, so that's what I mean by coached or taught. So make sure that we're being descriptive about that. And then the facilitator had group members share an example, do a role play, and then basically you'll just describe how they were able to participate in the session. So, hi. So if it's something where they are participating using by raising their hands, or whenever we do sex ed in Ford Cottage, we'll do like different, like this means yes, or put your hands on your head for no. So it's not necessarily verbal contributions, so we wouldn't be looking for those direct quotes, but you would be describing how they participated as required by the group. So the description of service to use for verbal discussions. Like I said, you can talk about thinking skills, problems to be solved, challenging behaviors. You can talk about what the facilitator described. And again, make sure we're being descriptive. So the facilitator described whatever thinking skill as when you, so you would say the facilitator described catastrophizing as when someone thinks the worst is going to happen in any situation. The facilitator instructed the client to provide an example of this or an example of when the client demonstrated. Again, that's the giving the facilitator the credit, right? So if you're the one asking the client to provide an example and they do, that's great. Like, go ahead and include that, because that is that service provided and the interaction that y'all have. Yeah, absolutely. And again, if it turns into one of those groups where it's sometimes your intention as a facilitator is to kind of like popcorn around, like, all right, I'm going to ask each one of y'all to show me an example of the skill. And then it turns into like a peer asking to help out another peer. And then they kind of move away from this like facilitator group dynamic to more of a solid like peer accountability, peer interaction. That's something that you can say as well. Like a peer asked this client to be more specific, and they said, whatever. Just make sure that, like we said earlier, like we give credit where credit is due. So an example of a good service provided, the facilitator taught how to identify areas of strength and thinking skill deficits. A staff member passed out a CPS thinking skills worksheet and guided the group through an explanation of common thinking skills staff members have observed lacking within the cottage. 2 staff role-played the thinking skill, handling feelings when angry or frustrated, providing both a positive example and a negative example. The facilitator led a group discussion on the client's interpretation of the role play. So that is like a very clear, I feel like reading that you have a very clear understanding of how the hour was spent, right? You kind of see every step that the group went through. And then of course in your client participation, you would say client completed the worksheet and raised their hand to share their thoughts on a positive thinking skill. Client said, my positive thinking skill is this, that, or the other. And so it is, once you get it down, like there is a pretty clear format of like, you can kind of go sentence by sentence, service provided, client response, back and forth as you kind of move through that group. So participation in the service, we do look for objectivity, which means that we, it's not going to be, so it's not, clients seemed to be participating in the session. Clients seemed to be actively listening, right? We'll say client showed active listening as evidenced by their body language and making eye contact with the facilitator. So the information needs to be factual. Your opinion on what they're doing is not necessarily service provided to be paid for. So if you are going to observe a behavior and make an inference from an observed behavior, make sure that we are showing the evidence to back up that. Like the description of services, a quote from the group is not enough. Sometimes we'll get logs that are like, so-and-so participated really well in group. They said, I also have cognitive thinking errors. They showed progression in, but it's like, why? Why do they say that? What were they talking about? What does that even mean? And then sometimes it will be completely, the kids will say things that have nothing to do with the group whatsoever. And we'll get quotes of like, so-and-so asked, like a weird sex ed question in the middle of their social skills group. And it's like, no, that's not appropriate. It would be relevant to put like an irrelevant quote in your log to show that they're not paying attention or to show that they're otherwise like not understanding, but just make sure that we're having that qualifying sentence. So Billy showed lack of focus on the group prompt by raising his hand and asking about what's for lunch. Just again, being specific is going to be the most important thing. We do not need the behavior noted unless it was disrupted. Oh, sorry. Note the lack of participation. So sometimes you'll have kids show up to group and they can't handle it. They just can't do it. They're, head in their hands, sound asleep, or they're upset and they're kicking the wall while we're trying to do group. You can note that. You can say so-and-so struggled to participate successfully in group based on their behaviors of turning their back to the group facilitator and talking out with peers. So even if they do not participate, you are still providing a service, right? So you can describe whatever that interaction looks like for them. And then we don't need the behavior noted. So if I'm saying client maintained eye contact and raised his hand, what else would I need to say to make that applicable in a log? Client maintained eye contact and raised his hand to show that he was actively listening to his peers share or whatever. But I would say that if that's the only thing that client did, like we had a kid in Ford Cottage who was like Noah, who was like just sitting in group all the time. You just sit there the whole time, and he'd get good scores because like, oh, he participated, but he's just sitting there having a good time. Yeah, just a little potato. And go ahead. No. You get lost a little bit with kids like that, especially if you're disruptive.
very easy to be like, oh, this person was outstanding. That person is treating just as much as the other group of push. So you can, even if the rest of the group is really disruptive, I might say that somebody sitting there quietly might have progressed in their ability to ignore outside distraction. That's one of the lagging skills. But if they just kind of were under the radar, they have the absolute ability to respond thoughtfully to the prompt and hint. Their level of advancements, a lot of their stuff depends on their participation in group. You're also giving them a false understanding of how they're progressing in treatment if you just kind of go on autopilot and give the same
care. Absolutely. So we do need to be like very observant of some of those quieter kids or some of the kids whose participation looks different. So sometimes we'll have kids who love worksheets. Like they will sit down, they will complete a worksheet all day long. But if you ask them to verbally participate, they're not going to do it, right? So that's also on the group facilitator. And again, like when y'all start facilitating groups, that'll be on you as the group facilitator to make sure that we're kind of playing to these kids' strengths. Definitely push them, right? We don't want to say like, oh, okay, worksheet's fine all the time, like you never have to talk. But understand that their level of participation might look different based on kind of what their ability is to interact. And then that's a great time to notice a lagging skill in group and talk about it in IST. Figure out like, hey, you don't seem to verbally participate in group, but in the milieu, you never stop talking. Like, what's going on there? So make sure that we're kind of using our time in IST to build those lagging skills as they come up in groups, especially in order to kind of help them participate. And then, if that kid ends up participating verbally really well for several months and then something happens where they stop, that's not like they've shown that they're able to verbally participate, right? And so then it's like no longer acceptable to accept only written or only whatever. Yeah, does that make sense? Okay. I get lost in my examples sometimes, so sorry. Okay. Participation in the service, choose the correct thinking skill. If you quote a client, it must be their exact words. I cannot tell y'all how many times I get logs and it's like, oh, the client said they were, I'm perplexed by the idea. And I'm like, that kid does not talk like that. Like, no. So if you only hear part of a quote, you are absolutely allowed to start a quote, put whatever relevant information they didn't say that you think, like if they're talking about introducing themselves and making eye contact and they say, oh, I have a hard time making eye contact because, and then you don't really hear the rest of it, then you can say client went on to explain how, but you cannot just like make something up and say that they said it. Don't restate the description of service, which is funny because this is restating it from the previous slide. Yeah, don't make it up, state only the facts. Oh, and then if you were not in the group, but you were still having to write logs, which we really try to keep from happening, but sometimes, unfortunately, that just tends to be the case. If you're going to put a direct quote, you need to say as reported by staff. So like a quote within a quote, as reported by staff, client said, whatever relevant quote that they have. So been talking a lot about thinking skills. I'll dive a little bit further into that right now. Thinking skills are an order of developmental progress, and y'all will learn that more as you talk later about our like neurocognitive model and then, neurosequential model, and then the plan B, plan C, plan A conversations and stuff. So it's important to ensure that they demonstrate one area before moving on to another. So it goes in order: language and communication skills, attention and working memory, emotion and self-regulation, cognitive flexibility, and social thinking. So social thinking is going to be kind of our top tier skill. So if a child is not able to show that they can focus on something that's going on in front of them, we're not going to be able to dock them for their cognitive flexibility, right? So they need to have one before the other. So just to go through each of those things. Oops. So language and communication skills, pretty self-explanatory. If you're here, I'm sure you have great language and communication skills. helps with understanding what others are saying, following the flow of conversations, being able to quickly understand, saying what they're thinking or what they need, saying what's bothering them, what they're feeling, and quickly finding the words that they need. So what you might see if language and communication skills are lacking is you might see difficulty expressing their feelings, concerns, or solutions. One of my favorite goals for a kid to have is being able to think of more than one solution to a problem. So that I really like until I started this job, like probably wouldn't have crossed my mind as like something that people may or may not be able to do, right? But you have some kids with really rigid thinking, or kids who are not super inclined to find additional solutions. And so they really struggle with, well, hey, we can't do X right now. Let's find another solution. And they're like, what? No. Like, if I can't do this thing, then this does not make sense to me. So that might also look like silence, delays in responding, or trouble keeping up with a like rapid back and forth conversation. That would be pretty obvious in IST as well with these kids. What do you think might be difficult for a kid in a group setting who struggles with language and communication skills? Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so being able to show that they're participating verbally, right? Kind of like that example we were talking about earlier. And then, yeah, being able to open up. If they don't know the words to describe how they're feeling, then they're not going to be able to talk about their feelings. They're not going to be able to talk about their experiences in the way that other kids are. So again, we need to make sure that we're meeting them where they're at. And it is acceptable for a kid who struggles with language and communication skills to not participate verbally, or to need additional prompts to participate verbally. Whereas a kid who has excellent cognitive flexibility skills, we would expect them to be able to have those language and communication skills. Attention and working memory skills. Fort Cottage guys, this is going to be our biggest, probably our biggest set of lagging skills is that attention and working memory. So sticking with things that need a lot of attention, doing things in order, keeping track of time, thinking about more than one thing at once, staying focused, ignoring distractions. Can somebody give me an example of a diagnosable mental disorder that would be applicable to struggling with attention and working memory? ADHD. And would anyone like to conveniently guess what is the most diagnosed or the highest frequency of diagnosis on this campus? Yeah, ADHD. So this is going to be a big one for all of us, especially those younger guys in Ford. So what you might see is scatterbrained kids who lose or forget things, or can I go back down to my hall? Oh, I forgot this. Can I go back down to my room? Oh, I know we're supposed to do this, so I need to go back and get this because I forgot it, and I need to go, and like just not being able to keep up with their items at all. They really struggle with series of tasks. This was something that I had to learn like pretty quickly on the job because I'm like, I told you to do 3 things. Like, why can't you go do the 3 things but it's tough for them to keep just the one, right? So breaking down kind of what they need to do, and again meeting them where they're at. So it's always acceptable to challenge these kids. It's always acceptable to like push them out of their comfort zone as long as it has a therapeutic benefit. But at the same time, like if a kid is really not able to focus or keep up with their things or keep track of time, like building that skill is going to be the most important part. And that's not going to be done by forcing them to do it, right? There's got to be a series of conversations and special programs and interventions that are actually helpful. So they have a hard time predicting consequences too. So that's going to be a big one for some of our more behaviorally challenged kids. Yeah, impulse control is a big lagging skill for a lot of these kids. So those skills for as regarding the logs, that will look like thinking about what might happen before they do it. That's a big skill for the kids with the attention and working memory skill deficits. And
they're looking for that dopamine rush probably to instant satisfaction, I guess.
Yeah, they did some research that a lot of kids who have criminal exposure to narcotics and methamphetamine really struggle with that area of the brain.
mm-hmm.
So a lot of times a kid like grabbing something they're not supposed to, or yelling at something they're not supposed to, really irks somebody else. In mind, is still not will.
Mm-hmm.
They're not intentionally disrespecting you. Sometimes if I'm doing that, but there's a lot of skills that
Mm-hmm.
they don't have for good reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so what that might look like for y'all in IST sessions is what I like to tell my kids, that retroactive thinking. So if they're able to look back on a situation and go, "Oh, I should not have said that," or "I should not have thrown my fidget across the room at my peer. That was not a good idea." That is a huge first step, right? And being able to interfere or intervene on that before it happens. And so, again, meeting them where they're at. If they're only able to talk about it after it happens, that's fine. That's a great means of conversation in IST sessions, being able to reflect on their behavior. And that way, the next time a situation like that comes up, you can say, "Hey, last time you threw your fidget at your peer, maybe you should hand it to me, or maybe you should set it down for right now," or um, you know, those kind of scaffolding the interventions until they're able to do it on their own and recognize situations like that on their own. Emotional regulation and self-regulation. So that's handling feelings when angry, frustrated, annoyed, worried, anxious, sad, depressed, disappointed. Thinking about what might happen for doing something, pausing before they respond, waiting for something they want, being able to get their energy up. I think a lot of times when we think of emotional regulation and self-regulation, we think a lot about negative behaviors. So a kid's screaming, a kid's upset, they're angry, they're hitting walls and running away. And sometimes we don't think enough about, sometimes they're really excited. They just got to go play on the virtual reality headsets at school and they have a lot of energy. And then, like, for some kids, that gets them in trouble more than when they're upset. It's handling those high energy, handling feelings of excitement or happiness, because that is also emotional dysregulation, right? Even though that kind of has a more negative context. What you might see when these skills are lacking: quickly flooded by emotion. So kids that just drop of a hat, they're crying, they're angry, or they're just like over the moon. They're what looks like hyperactivity, or all of a sudden they start talking too loud, or just a lot of quick onsets of emotion, whatever that emotion might be. Chronic grouchiness, irritability, fatigue, and anxiety. So kind of what we think of when we think of those like classic, I think of like the antidepressant commercials where it's like the person walking around and they have the cloud over them and they're gray. These kids who are pretty consistently just down. They're tired, they're falling asleep, or they're very quick to irritate, very frustrated. Also looks like difficulty responding to demands, to shift arousal level. So if a kid is really excited and you're going, "Whoa, calm down, like, they're not going to do it. They can't. They don't have any skills. They don't have any support to do so, right? And so, again, that's a good angle for y'all in IST. Like, hey, I noticed that after you go play basketball with your peers, you're really excited and you have a hard time calming down. Like, what are some things that can help you do that?" And the kids will surprise you sometimes with their insight, like being able to say, "Oh, like, I think if I drank a glass of cold water, it would really help me calm down." It's like, "Oh, okay." But they're not going to be able to ask you that in the moment when they're really excited, right? So that planning, that proactive communication is going to be really important.
you get excited and can't control yourself, and that tends to get you in trouble. And because you're not able to shift that energy elsewhere,
Mhm.
what do you see happening in the future if you continue like that behavior, and what could we do to
Yeah.
change it around?
Yeah, and that's the thinking about what might happen before doing something, right? So like, hey, next time you're really excited, remember that this time it got you put on safety because you were showing unsafe behaviors or whatever it might be. Yeah, that's a really good point. So you talking about their consequences is really effective too, because again, a lot of times they're not going to be able to see it for themselves, and they might need that like additional reminder. And it might be every single time you have to go, hey, remember, we don't want to get put on safety. So what can we do? Not in a punitive way of like, you're going to get put on safety. You better stop. It's, hey, remember this happened last time. You didn't like that. How do we avoid those consequences? And what can we do to support you so that you're not like putting yourself out all the time to not get these consequences?
You can also combine another skill, like the social thinking skills has one there that's willing to look at through other perspectives, willing to understand the perspectives of others. So if we're doing this, I get this a lot. Like a kid will get irritated and storm off down the hall, and you combine that. Hey, if you were emotionally dysregulated and we're storming down the hall, it's going to seem unsafe to us. Therefore, you're going to be unsafe. Instead of like it's a consequence, it's like, hey, this is from my perspective. This is unsafe, and this is why this is happening there. Also, very effective. Understanding what they're doing before doing something, couple that with a skill, couple that with a grounding technique, a breathing technique, a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a
Give
great
them a
point.
way
Before
they
it
can
gets
not
to
do
the
that.
storming off, maybe take some breathing
Mhm.
exercises.
And document how you taught them breathing exercises and document how they respond to that. Right? So, I'm sorry, what did you say? Wait, so staff,
Jason.
staff practiced triangle breathing with Mikey. And as a way to emotionally regulate his behaviors in order to avoid unsafe behaviors. And in the client participation, you would want to say, Mikey practiced triangle breathing 3 times. This is what he said about it.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, those refusals can also be documented. So we have a kid who is very quick to upset, but he hates when you tell him to like do any type of anything that will make him feel better. So you can absolutely put that in your log as well. Like staff attempted to practice rainbow breathing with client, and client said, shut up, I hate you, I don't want to do this. Like that's still services provided, and shows their response to it, and shows areas of growth for that kid as well. Moving on to cognitive flexibility skills, so skills that help with changing from one activity to another, seeing things as kind of rather than all one way or the other. So that kind of combating that black and white thinking, imagining different ways things could happen, handling changes to routine, new situations, being able to change their mind, understanding why a plan might change, understanding why they might need to be cognitively flexible, and not taking things too personally. So when these skills are lacking, looks like that concrete black and white thinking of, you know, you said every time it's above 85 degrees, we have to wear sunscreen, and so-and-so went outside to walk to the dining hall and he's not wearing sunscreen. Like, why is this allowed? So we get a lot of kids who either like very strictly adhere to the rules. A lot of times you'll see this not when it pertains to that particular client. So you'll have a client who's very strict about what other people are doing, but then are kind of able to explain why they don't do that. Or, clients who, when they have it in their mind that they are going to wake up and they're going to eat pancakes and they're going to drink cranberry juice, and then they get to the dining hall and it's grape juice and toast, like they have a really hard time reorienting their routine to the reality of how their day is going to go. Poor at generalizing information. So they might do a really good job sitting appropriately in group and participating in group, but when they go to school, they can't generalize that skill over to school. Or they might do a good job with playing a certain game with their peers, but whenever other peers are involved or it's a different game, they can't participate appropriately or interact with their peers appropriately. Like generalizing those behaviors are really difficult. They get stuck on things too. So just kind of a cyclical, like, well, so-and-so said that I can have my magic cards in group. Like, well, no, we talked about it. We're not gonna have the magic cards in group. Here's why. Well, but they said that I could have it. Well, they said, and that's why I think not really a point for the logs, but just a point to keep in mind is like, that's why crosstalk with your team is so important, because if a kid hears one thing from somebody, they're going to want to use that in any context. And so if you're going to make an exception for a kid and say like, hey, you can have your magic cards in this group today because you just had a really tough talk with your PO and you're really upset and we see that you need something to fidget with during group, you can have them for 15 minutes, right? And then the kid the next day goes, well, Mr. Nelson said that I can have my magic cards in group. Like, no, Mr. Nelson made a very clear exception to the rule, but then that would be a good time to make sure that we're communicating with the team, right? Sending out a text like, hey, I told so-and-so they can have their cards for 15 minutes, or letting the other staff know, hey, I'm out at 2:45, so at 3 o'clock, make sure that they don't have their cards anymore, whatever. That communication is really important between y'all. Do you have any questions about cognitive flexibility skills? Okay. And social thinking, that is going to be skills that help with paying attention to what other people are saying and doing, understanding what people mean, starting and having conversations, getting other people's attention, just any interpersonal skill that they could be practicing, that's going to fall under social thinking skills. What you'll see in these skills are lacking difficulty with basic social norms, difficulty reading body language, tones and cues, understanding how their behavior affects others, seeing other people's points of view, and empathy. And so as we're talking about the neurosequential model and this all being kind of expounding upon each other, keep in mind that that means empathy is going to be kind of the overarching lagging skill. And that might not be the case for all the kids. Some kids might be very empathetic, but really struggle with cognitive flexibility. But just generally in the neurosequential model, that's kind of where that leads to. Any question about social thinking skills? Okay. Recreational skill building. So RSB is something that, what does BRS stand for, Mr. Ford? Behavior Rehabilitative Services. Okay, this is what I was thinking, recreational, because this is behavior and recreational. Recreational skill building is something the BRS contract requires. So we offer all kinds of activities. At the bottom of your logs, it'll have like the time in which they spend doing the RSB activities. So we must record the activity, and all that will say at the bottom of your log is from 6 to 7 p.m. so-and-so is socializing with peers, or they were playing basketball, playing a board game. That's going to be like just a very short blurb to say, here's what they were doing. Typically, if they're in the milieu, like playing Magic or watching a movie or something, it's going to be socializing with peers. Yeah. Any questions about RSB? Okay. Okay. Progress rating. So this one is really important. The progress ratings are the data that we use on each kid's 90-day case review. So at the end of their first 30 days, we do a review, and then each 90 days after that. And we look at the progress rating to consider their growth in the program. And then they have to have a certain progress rating before, like they need to have pretty consistent nines as a like graduation criteria. So this one is a little bit harder because it is going to be your perception of how well they're doing. And the goal obviously is to not be biased or not focus on, oh, this kid really pissed me off right before group, and now I have to give them a rating because they did a really good job in group, right? So we need to make sure that we're focusing only on that service provided and the client response, and then considering just those two things for the progress rating. So progress ratings are based on the individual client and their skill set. So if we have a client who's been here for 2 years, they've almost met all of their graduation requirements, and they are in group and they keep talking out, they are not focusing on the group prompt, showing a lot of lagging skills, then they would get a much lower score than a kid who has been here for 2 months and struggles with attention and working memory. And if they're not paying attention and they're struggling to keep up with the conversation, that's going to be or the effort involved in that kid's interaction in group is going to be a lot higher than the kid who has been here for forever and has those skills and is choosing not to use them. If a client is refusing to meet for IST, the score will be 3 or lower. They're not going to get higher than a 3 if they're just saying like, no, shut up, I don't want to talk to you, right? So the ranges are from 0 to 9. 0 is critical, which means that the kid, worst case scenario, gets put into a CPI hold, which y'all will learn about later. They become physically aggressive. So basically, if a kid is in group and they do something that warrants an incident report for any type of staff or peer intimidation, physical aggression, supervision concern, etc., then that would be critical. So kind of like I said earlier, if a kid is not participating in the group, if they walk down their hallway and they're out of earshot, like we're not providing a service to them. If a kid is over in their hallway and they're punching the walls and screaming and whatever, like that's critical behavior. That is not participating in the group. And that could be even if they're within earshot, even if they're, sitting in the middle of the milieu. If they're displaying these behaviors, that's critical. 1 to 2 is regressive. So that may include being removed from group, having to use the isolation room, or highly disruptive. So that's a kid who is starts yelling at a peer in the middle of a group and going like, oh, you're stupid and I hate you and I'm gonna mess you up. And we remove them from the group and we have them use an isolation room. Typically they're still like within earshot of the group, but their behavior is disruptive and they're not participating, but it's not quite critical because they're not being physically aggressive, they're not harming anybody, they're just being disruptive. And then that's included, that might be a little bit less intense in the way that it might be a kid who, is talking out a lot in group or having side conversations. And so we ask them to go sit at the back and take some space before they're able to rejoin successfully. That would still be a 1 or a 2 without that like big disruptive behavior. 3 is stationary. That's not participating, but not necessarily acting out. Again, that's sitting quietly, facing forward, feet on the floor, but yeah, they're not talking, they're not, yeah.
Not falsifying any of the photographs.
Exactly.
If we just, say 9s because we want
them
to get up out of here.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that
Yeah, and remember, with that neurosequential model, there's a lot of skills to be gained, right? So if we have a kid who is great at paying attention, maybe they're not so great at cognitive flexibility, and we're not seeing any interaction with the group, so we're not able to know if they are actually practicing those skills or learning those skills, or even if there's like a greater deficit in any of the skills that we have already seen.
One thing else if they had a king-like speech or a terrible disruptive group, formal is more likely than the latter. Or latter is more likely than formal. But we always give them a 3, and the reason for that is because after the comp and MSP, which is after 30 days of them being here, we now know them a little bit better. So if Billy is, has been here for 30 days and his progress has been like, terrible, disrupting the group has to move all the time. And then, so then after the day after his company, we know it. Maybe Billy has to use the open door ISO, but is able to participate somewhat appropriately based on what we know of Billy. Billy then gets a 4. So whereas it might be disruptive, he is progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know that he's progressing because we know we've had that 30 days to get to know him, know what progression and regression is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yes,
During the 30-day assessment, what if, like, I don't know everyone's story, but I'm sure you'll have someone that is intelligent, can manipulate people and act like they can do all things or show these things, but then after the 30 days, they're like, I'm just tired of acting or showing that I can do this stuff, so I'm just gonna regress into.
So that's a honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, you still give them a 3 or 4?
That's
That's
a tricky situation. So if they're able to act the way they're supposed to, manipulate, as you said, and they're able to do it.
Right.
So
It's what they're just choosing not to, or when they apply.
So that would be like a 1 to the 2. I would still hold them the same thing. You show us you're able to sit quietly in group.
Yeah.
I don't know how you might have thought you were pulling the wool over your eyes, but I know you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, that is the standard.
Put them lower than maybe they actually are, so they always have a room to grow and strive for.
I get very greedy with my kids, because I always think that they can do better. Something I have to check myself with constantly, but like, I feel like from the scores that I've gotten back to the staff, they have a great understanding of what 1, 2, 3, 4, what they have a good understanding of that. So it just kind of depends on what card you in. You're gonna be 4? Okay.
These 3
I
or
don't
4.
think I might have to worry about that too much. But.
We are gonna help you through that. Like they say, you can only do that for like 6 months, like the best, serial sociopath and more.
Yeah.
Our kids can't do it for any of
And if they're like that, then they already think they're smarter than you, which means you're so much further ahead of them. They show their cards very quickly. One thing like that we do that combats kind of that stagnation with kids or the in continuity with their skills is that we do have those 90-day reviews. And so if that first 30 days they're like perfect angels in group and they're participating and they're being helpful to their peers and all that, and then for the next 90 days they're just like talking out and having to use an ISO and being inappropriate, we would change their skills or their goals. And so we would do like a shift of focus. So instead of worrying about whether or not a kid can consider 2 possibilities at once, we're going to worry about whether they can focus on one thing at a time or pay attention to more than one thing or whatever it is. So we do reevaluate those goals every 90 days to hopefully catch the kids who are either just very inconsistent in general or purposely trying to present one way when their skill level says another. Yeah.
One of the things that I really struggled with when I was a residential counselor leading groups was trying to keep the group moving, but without disrupting it too much. So not identifying things that were wrong in the group. Just trying to keep it, the peace. Like in my head, like I felt like we play the video Mario, and you like kind of like barely like can breathe out of that top. That's what I felt like I was doing. Like I was barely breathe. But the more you attack your group, and the more you are proactive with how you plan it, how you document it. Also, the more proactive you are about encouraging them to care about these log scores the better results you're going to have. You will have rough original groups because they will push you. They will, oh, here, Mr. Nelson, I don't know about Mr. Nelson. Me and him are cool.
No.
Yeah, kind of thing. That situation will happen, and then you will get the acting out. If you can invest them in these scores, you will get greater investment in group. If you can help them value the score they get in group, also a great IST conversation, because this is a very optimal time for them to act out. They've just gotten done with school. They have been sitting down all day. They are now sitting down in group. They've already attended a group in the morning. They're pissed off at their peers. Mikey called Billy something or other, said something about his mom, and he has to sit by him in group. You have a lot of dynamics there. The more you get them to engage, the more you get them to care about these progress ratings, the better buy-in you're going to get, and easier it's going to be for you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you get them, and then they're gathered, and then there is some sort of attention. And then what kind of phrasing do you use that's most successful for them to buy into the activity? Like what? What do you say? Not how you, but like what are a couple of phrases that, generally speaking, are?
That's a phenomenal question. It goes way beyond phrases. So something that is so important is that milieu is spotless. Their behavior will reflect how that room looks.
Okay.
It drives me nuts when I, come in for group counseling and there's just a whole bunch of stuff from choice or from their time after school spread around, because that will be cleaned up and I will get the kids to clean it up, but that's not how I want to spend my group counseling session. So if the kids are at school and you're leading an afternoon group, make that milieu exactly the way you would want it, with if you've got kids who get thirsty, have cups next to the sink so they don't have to go through the cupboards. Have it be as orderly as possible, because they will. Oh, okay, so this is an orderly environment. I will conduct myself appropriately there. As far as phrases or words, it's going to be your flavor, and it's difficult to say your reputation as how you lead groups and how you've been a support staff to a group. They're going to know how much effort you put into that. If you're like scribbling on a dry erase board as you're trying to go through group rules expectations, they're not going to take you as seriously, and stuff's going to happen. You might have showed up for your PM shift and there's immediately a hold that you had to participate in and you weren't able to get group ready. That's fine, but if you do have the opportunity, if you have a group, you got staff, you got Mr. Porter, Ms. Underwood telling you that, hey, can I get you to do this? Nope, I'm sorry, I've got a group in 30 minutes, I gotta play. The more preparation you take in our group, they notice that. They know they speak bullshit fluently.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting there like, no, you cannot. So they've had adults, try to do that their whole life. So the more you make your group this way, they will have more fun. They want that structure. They want to feel safe in that group. They want to feel that Billy's not gonna flip it off Mikey from the other side of the room. And if he does, they trust that you'll be able to handle it. But Mikey's also engaged in the group too, because Billy and Mikey are both engaged in the group, because your group is interesting. It's fun for them. It's educational. And here's an important part, their behavior in that group will be consequence. And I don't mean negative consequence. They will receive a consequence for that group. How else you can do that? Check in with the case manager. Say, hey, I just want to let you know, Billy did a really good job in group the other day. Your log writing, if it's a generic like copy and paste log, I'm not going to go up to Billy and be like, hey, you did a good job in group. But if it is a well-documented thing, I'm going up to Billy and be like, hey, I really appreciate wow, my case manager knew that because my special counselor who's running group, it's like everybody, your name rings out.
They like feel that care and respect.
And on that note too, like the kids and just humans in general put a lot of weight to negativity. And so some of the kids, even the ones who do who do relatively neutral or pretty good as far as their expectations are concerned, they'll come up to us and go, everyone just tells me everything negative that I do all the time. Like I can't do anything right. Everyone just says I'm messing up and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So those positives are so important to outweigh like what they feel like is just the crushing weight of the negatives that they receive. Because a lot of times in groups, especially, it's a lot of, hey, stop talking. Hey, don't raise your hand while we're talking. Hey, make sure that your shoes are off the couch. Hey, and not a lot of, hey, dude, that was a really good share. Hey, I love your peer feedback. That was really insightful. I love how you're sitting quietly and whatever. So yeah. And the more that you can like disseminate those to where it's not just coming from one person, the better. And that will kind of build your team strength, because then you don't have like, oh, well, Mikey only likes Mr. Ford, so he'll only listen to what Mr. Ford says. And it's like, hey, like we all have good rapport with Mikey. And so if Mikey's flipping off Billy, we can all say, hey, man, that's not cool. Don't do that. And he'll go, oh, my bad. No, you're good. You're good.
But it's something. Is it okay to, let them know that? I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah. If you think about it, listen. Go ahead.
There was like something I thought kind of conceptual of the question. Like even positively reinforcing like negative things. There's like we have like a kid who has like medical things going on, and we've really been teaching our kids to like advocate for him. Like they're choosing to advocate like kind of going at staff, like they're not, these little things. It's like we're trying to kind of redirect them, but like, wow, I really appreciate that you're advocating for your peer right now, but like, we should find another way to do it. Can we like calmly advocate for them? It's still like complimenting and redirecting, but like telling them like, there's a better way we can do this. You just need to be on the same page, like redirect in a kind manner instead of yelling at staff or yelling at your peers. Like, but I really appreciate the fact that you're advocating. Like that's really caring, and your peer probably really appreciates that they have to know on their side.
Well, I think habituating them into leads with the positive,
Yeah.
actually makes them more receptive to be pleasing to you.
Absolutely.
And so it does a couple of different functions continuously. But because they're most of the time all they've gotten is stop doing that. When you play, it's always been that. So you want to have a different trick. Sometimes there are a few tricks and phrases that are like shut down the behavior and then make them free attention. So that's really what I was fishing for.
Yeah.
Because I don't like that. It feels kind of weaponizing when they're like, this is gonna go on your Rubik.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that's not how I want
You would have loved to.
Right.
Knock this off.
Well,
there other things I can say?
Yeah. So, I guess back to your question about like what is effective in kind of getting the group on board with what you're doing.
Yeah.
One thing so we as case managers, we run GCs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think it's different in Steel, but Mondays and Wednesdays. But it's essentially our version of GST, right? And so something that's helpful for me when my group is sitting down and ready to go is to ask questions that everyone can answer. So like, hey, who remembers what we did last week? A couple hands go up. Hey, who can tell me what Billy said about high risk situations last week? And the kids are, I think I remember. I think and so getting them kind of engaged, getting them like reflecting back on what we talked about. If it's a new group, I think it's a good idea. If you're doing a group about like introducing yourself, I'll just keep up with that example. So hey, who has ever had a really embarrassing situation where you try to introduce yourself and like, let's have a couple people share. So then you're telling funny stories and whatever. Anything to get them kind of all focused, because I feel like sometimes if you sit down in group and you go, okay, Billy, what do you think about? And then they're like, I don't want to listen to my peer. Like, he just called me a bitch at school. Like, I don't want to hear what he has to say. So kind of like really positioning yourself as a facilitator. And like Mr. Ford said, having that reputation is really important as well, of like, I respect y'all when y'all talk to me, so please respect me when I talk to y'all, kind of thing. And building that, doing that like pre-work before
Sure.
is going to be really beneficial. And then, like you said as well, just on the fly, like you'll know the kids, you'll know them very quickly.
And they will know you.
Yes, and they will know you. And so being able to kind of take things that are important to them and use those as like engagement things is going to be really beneficial as well.
Yeah. So if, like you said, some kids would like, oh, I don't know, I'm so stupid, maybe down stuff really harshly. Would it be in our realm of responsibility to say, hey, now what does that type of thinking, what do you think that type of thinking, happens if you keep on saying that?
Yeah.
Like you're gonna believe that that's true about yourself, but it's not. And so when you do things more positively, just we look at ourselves in a better light.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that something that is that a therapist thing? You know what I mean?
No, I mean y'all have absolute like jurisdiction to say stuff like that to them. Make sure that we're not saying like you should be more positive, but like saying like, hey man, like
show them
what
dangers of
yeah, hey, I see that you're really ruminating on the fact that you woke up and you don't love how your hair looks today. Like you keep bringing that up. What's going on? Yeah, like let's. Right. Like, why don't we appreciate the outfit and the shoes and the, like what positive things can that kid look at? Because, sometimes there are negatives and you have to live with them, but there are always positives to kind of offset that. Yeah. And so y'all absolutely have full reign to say like, hey, if you're going to start your day feeling gross about yourself, like how's that going to affect the rest of your day, right? What can we do right now to make sure that you start feeling better before you go to school and like get stressed out about math or something? Just moving quickly through the rest of the slides, I really appreciate y'all's discussion. Like y'all are doing a fantastic job. 4, 5, 6, moving towards goals. So the client will address his own behaviors in group, increase participation, offer insightful comments. That one will be pretty self-explanatory. Where we want to work to remain unbiased is, whether it's a 4, 5, or a 6. Sometimes I'll get logs about a kid and they do like very general, like they participate, they're engaged, and they're like, that's a 6. And I'm like, yeah, it's a 4. Like it's not, yeah. So that kind of gets sticky, but it's you'll get better at it as you go along. 7 or 8 is partially attained. Clients should be addressing their own behaviors honestly, seeking feedback, presenting for graduation or additional statuses. So for the sexually harmful behavior caseloads, they have to do a presentation for 5-to-1 ratio, which just means that they get kind of additional privileges. They can go on outings with other kids from the sexually harmful behavior caseload, et cetera, et cetera. So if a kid is working on like presenting for their 5-to-1 and they're in group and they're giving peer feedback and they're taking accountability for their actions, like that's when we can start looking at like a 7 or 8, right? But it really helps out y'all being able to choose what progress rating they get, because a kid who's been here for 3 months is not going to be presenting for their 5-to-1. That's going to be a kid who's been here for 9 months, a year, whatever their pace is, and who has like shown a lot of growth and a lot of privileges by that time as well. And then 9 is fully attained. We expect a client to run a group before they're able to graduate, set expectations, they guide the open discussion, they offer genuine feedback. So essentially they're the facilitator, right? We're there to help them out, we're there to offer them support, but like it's on them to pretty much fully facilitate a group. Yeah, because like, how do I know that y'all know a skill if you're able to teach it to me, right? So that's going to be kind of our gauge of whether they're fully attaining their goal. We touched on it briefly earlier, but when not to write a BRS log, again, if the client is exhibiting behavioral instability, so they were gone for the majority of the group because they had to take space in their room, they were not there, we did not provide services to this kid. If they're absent because they're using an isolation or multi-purpose room, sometimes I'll have kids in my GC who cannot participate, so they go into the multi-purpose room during Mr. Ford's group and they work on their worksheets, but they are not part of either of our groups. We're not offering services to them. And if they can't be seen from the group and if they can't hear the group, that's a very clear no services. If they're absent refusing to come out of the room, or if they're on a medical outing, if they are on a off-campus visit, any other thing. Obviously, if they're not on campus or in the building, if they're meeting with their mental health therapist, meeting with the case manager, they're not in, and those units can be made up elsewhere.
If I take the mobility for the entire time, you are now required to write IST, is a missed GST. So what I will usually do is take ability 815, so you can log in for 1 unit of GST, and then I've got him for the rest of the time. But then you don't have to write IST, but it is very important. And when I take ability, because my notes for ability are going to be the DSLs, the
Daily
daily
logs,
service.
yeah.
I think, dude, those that are due up to Nicole have the times that I'm in IC. So and we'll try to communicate that effectively. We might not, but if I'm taking Billy at 8:15 and you write a log saying 8 to 9, I'm going to write a log that's saying he was in IC from 8:15 to 9:15. You're going to get that log back from Nicole. You don't want logs back. It just creates just more paperwork. We deal with pieces of paper here. Please make it easy on yourself. Double check your work. Double check your spelling and all that kind of good stuff.
Sorry.
Prevents anything bad happening in the ether, something getting lost, shredded under it or behind the printer or something like that.
You are welcome to copy your logs and paste them into Microsoft Word so that it can spell check for you. Like, we encourage it, especially.
Don't spell check on the logs.
No. Yeah. I don't listen. Scott updates that program all the time. I don't know about it, so possibly, but yeah. Well, otherwise, we encourage you to do that if that's something that you need. Especially sentence structure. That is a big thing. And I don't know if that's just because I was like an English nerd in like college or whatever, but like, please make sure that your sentences make sense. Just to say, like no shorthand, no. Just read your sentences. Do they make sense? Can I understand what you're saying? Like I said, specificity is really important. You don't have to use like super flowery language. You don't have to use a ton of words to say what you need to say. But if you're going to be clear, or if you're going to be concise, please be clear.
Just don't be broad.
Yeah.
Just don't be like, yeah. I mean,
oh yeah, it's gonna be solid. Yes. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
And if there's going to be days where we have group and 2 kids blow out a group. There might have been a hold in your department and a hold in another department that you had to go to. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. You got to get logs out. You probably don't remember what happened in group. Maybe somebody wasn't taking notes because the 2 kids who blew out. We understand that those situations might happen in generic logs. And if you can talk to us and say, hey, this is what happened. Other than that, try to be specific about it, because the more specific, the better your logs are, the more we can give that feedback to that kiddo. And the more we can give that feedback to that kiddo, it's like, oh, what's happening, my behavior in group is reflected. It's not just, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Emma.
It's not just Miss Emma. No, it's not. I'm just kidding.
Miss J.
Miss J, I know Miss J was the one supervising the group, but Mr. Ford and Miss Underwood weren't even there. But they know how I did in group, so I better. And the more specific your logs are, the more we can follow up. Sometimes I will make a copy of the log.
Oh yeah, I love the logs that I can copy and give to the mental health therapist. The ones that I can like sit down with the kids, like that is so valuable. And a lot of that comes from IST. Like, there's typically not a lot of time for such profound things to happen in GST, although it's not unheard of. But yeah, those ISTs where I can just sit down and be like, okay, you hit like something that we haven't even reached yet, and the therapists haven't. So yeah, and again, that's skill that we'll build, and then it'll come so naturally to y'all that it'll just be like, yeah, Miss J's a hell of a counselor, Mr. Nelson's a hell of a, like, we'll be able to just,
we'll be
anticipate value and And
Well, I look
your
forward to
work.
very much reading Mr. Rennell's logs. Mr.
Yes,
Rennell's
that's
IST.
exactly what I was thinking of when I was saying that. Yeah, yeah.
Very talented IST writer. Sounds like Mr. Moore.
Mhm.
And that more, you guys have so much more influence over the kids than you think.
Mhm.
We have, I did not realize how much influence college staff have over the kids until I became a case manager.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, all the things I said to these kids, they were paying attention.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
what?
Oh
No,
no.
not one
No.
thing.
Especially if you spite them, then they're.
If you do not follow through, they might never tell you about it, but they
Yeah.
will log that forever.
Yeah. I recommend never making promises.
You are
never
never
saying.
going to be perfect, and you are
Yeah.
going to screw this up. When you're running groups, you are going to get to a place where you're kind of trying to let everything go, and it's going to get beyond your control, and then it's going to be a whole thing. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
So that you know how to make a group rigid. You might make a group too rigid, and the kids might blow up and get pissed off because they can't do anything right. But that is going to happen. You just go to the next. Just keep at it, keep after it. If you are still struggling with groups and there's no help, please reach out to case managers. We'll sit in there with you and give you some feedback. And this is what we can do that's better. This is how you can advocate to the supporting staff that you're supported in group, or we can give that feedback to the supporting staff. Like, hey, I'm sorry, Miss J's not facilitating group. She's not supposed to be dealing with behavior. So will you please be a little bit more on top of Billy not flipping off Mike?
Mm-hmm. Just real quick to close out this presentation. So whenever y'all write the logs, you print them out, you put them in the case manager's boxes. We get them the next morning. We look through them. We make any corrections on sticky notes, and then we give them to Nicole, and Nicole returns the ones that need correcting to y'all, and then you correct your own logs. So when you receive a log with a sticky note on it, please do not remove the sticky note. You'll go into the software, you will correct the log on the computer. You don't need to do anything with the corrected log or with the log with the sticky note on it, except look at it and fix it on the computer. So please do not take the sticky notes off. That will be there just to make sure that there's like fidelity in y'all's corrections. Y'all don't do handwritten logs, so I'm not gonna waste your time. Okay, so reasons to send back any service log. Program lingo is not permissible. So if you say like out of the program, so-and-so did not attend because they were in a stabilization alternative program. Like, what does that mean? Like, not acceptable. Trust level, so you can't say like so-and-so was asked to encourage their peers to earn their trust level 3. Yeah, like, well, what does that mean? You could say encourage to meet the requirements for trust advancement per the, but like there would really be no reason to do all that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe an opportunity for has a safety
status. Mm-hmm. Consequenced is not a word that tends to come up a lot. So-and-so is consequenced by being sent to a desk. No, we just say so-and-so due to excessive talking out in group was asked to sit at a desk, refocus at a desk until they're ready to participate successfully, whatever. Punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. I don't love this. It's ugly, but whatever. That's my personal thing. So if you're saying a quote and that's the end of your sentence, you'll put the period inside of the quotation marks, not outside. Nicole is the one who checks these, and Nicole is meticulous. So y'all might receive log corrections, like, just to be real, they're recording this, sorry Goldie, but just to be real, like, y'all might receive corrections that you go, what the hell, like, this is, yeah, really, this is stupid. And I promise you, we probably know that. Just fix it. Unfortunately, that's how it is. On the bright side of that meticulousness, our audits have been fantastic recently. So trust us when we say, like, I know it can be tedious to have to make little corrections like that, but it has really paid off and will save us a lot of work on the other end of the audits moving forward.
So this whole point is to show she does not need to be recast.
Yeah.
She is like very meticulous about everything, and it's actually really good that she is. It just gets a little irksome. Perhaps a little bit.
The recording.
She has asked me if I want to be in the Alliance.
Oh my gosh. Okay. You will receive your log if your name is not on the bottom and if you did not sign it. So that's to say you wrote the log. You're the one who is the point person on this information. Make sure your name's on it. Make sure you sign it. If the date is incorrect, so if you say we did GST from 8 to 9 and then you say that you did 5 units, it's going to be sent back because that's only 4 units. So make sure that our math is correct. And if a kid leaves group early for any reason, make sure we're saying 8 to 8:45, 3 units, etc. If you do evening group on October 11th, and for some reason you had such a long day you don't remember what day it is, and you put October 10th, make sure that your date is correct because that will get sent back to you as well. Oh, if for some reason you're doing a log after midnight, you had just like a really tough day, a lot went on, you weren't able to get around to the logs, remember that the date changes at midnight. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're doing your logs. Yeah, so if say, you're here, you're working this PM and you're here until 12:30 at night, technically that would be October 13th, right? But you're writing a log for a group on October 12th, make sure that we're paying attention and changing that date back to October 12th because it's going to change automatically on the computer at midnight. There's some other things like, that sentence structure is really important. If you write a sentence that doesn't make sense, I'm probably just going to send it back to you with a question mark or, I don't know how the other case managers like to do it, but I might just be like, hey, this doesn't make sense. And then make sure that whenever at the end you'll do like client progressed in their skill of handling feelings of anger or sadness as evidenced by taking deep breaths when their peer made a rude comment to them. So that is an example of the lagging skill, being able to handle anger or sadness, and a clear example of how they showed that they were working towards or progressing in that skill. Please don't say 2 things that don't make sense. So sometimes we'll have residential counselors who will say, so-and-so improved in their ability to handle feelings of anger or sadness as evidenced by being able to focus on more than one thing at once. Like, no, those are 2 lagging skills, right? So pick one. I don't care which one, as long as you saw progression or regression or stagnation in that group. But make sure that you have a clear and concise description of how they practiced or didn't practice that skill. So does anybody have any questions or anything? I'm sorry that we went a little bit over time into y'all's lunchtime, but.
If you have any questions, just please stop the case manager. We're the ones who read the logs. We're happy to coach you up. It's so much less work for us if you're able to ask questions.
Yeah. And if y'all write your first couple of logs and you get them back just covered in sticky notes and you're like, oh my God, what's happening? We will be more than happy to take extra time and sit down with y'all. And yeah. So, okay. Well, good luck in the rest of your training today. Yeah. Thank y'all.